Number 10. Roman laundry detergent. So my washing machine broke this past week, which was a pain in the neck. Worst thing about it was that it broke in the middle of a load, so I had to wash the rest by hand, which made me glad we have washing machines at all. However, the Romans were a little more simplistic with their methods of cleansing the cloth. Apparently, vessels were set out in the streets of Rome for anyone to just walk up to and relieve themselves into, and once full, they'd be taken down to the local laundromat. From there, workers would mix the vats with water and pour the combo onto their patrons' clothes, proceeding to stamp the clothes until clean? Yeah, sure, clean. Number 9. The fall of Drusus. In the case of historical poisonings, it's hard to determine whether or not they were actually poisoned or just died from being old. It's usually that they're old. But in the case of Drusus, the evidence was a little bit more clear. See, Drusus Julius Caesar was set to be the heir to Tiberius due to familial relations. His buddy Sejanus would have normally been the one to get the title, but blood is thicker than water. As a result, Sejanus tried to marry his daughter to Drusus' son, but that fell through. Sejanus was still determined to become the heir to Tiberius by whatever means necessary. This led to the two infighting frequently, and Sejanus eventually managed to seduce Drusus' wife, Livilla, who aided him in poisoning her husband, slowly killing him in a way that appeared to be natural, and he got away with it. Sejanus continued to rise to power until his sudden and brutal execution, which was later revealed to be due to someone leaking the truth about his rise to Tiberius. Man, this just needs to be a telenovela. Number 8. Decimation. You've likely heard the term before, used to describe the impact of some tragedy or another. However, the word actually has its roots in the Roman military, though its origin is a little different from how you might imagine. See, as I'm sure you know, the Roman military was infamous for its discipline and strategy. But if you've ever worked in any space with more than 10 people, you know it's hard to keep everyone in line. So how did the Romans do it? Simple. If one squad member screws up, the entire unit gets the punishment. Decimation roughly translates to removal of a tenth. The cohort would be divvied up into 10 groups, and each group would draw lots. The group with the shortest straws were then executed by the other 9 by whatever method was determined by their commander. The 9 of the surviving groups were then made to survive off barley, and if they had to relieve themselves, it would be outside of the camp's security. You know what? Maybe the military life just ain't for me. Number 7. The Crassus Cocktail. I love a good drink at the end of the day. Just getting a little mix here and there, it's just so fun. Ooh, if it's good, man, just caps off a hard day of work. It seems like Crassus was a man of similar taste, a general and a statesman who'd earned the title the richest man in Rome. Dude ran a bunch of wars, serious campaigns, and his last was against the Parthians, primarily because he was just kind of bent out of shape that the other generals were outshining him in the field. Unfortunately, Crassus's forces were absolutely slaughtered, and when his son Publius ended up being one of the casualties of war, Crassus went to parley. Negotiations went sour, and he and his entire party were wiped out. Apparently, after such a rough day, the Parthians figured that Crassus could use a little something to take the edge off, so they had him take a sip of molten gold. Fun fact, the melting point of gold is about 1064 degrees Celsius. Yeah, that'll have a kick. Number 6. The fall of Emperor Valerian. One of the later emperors of Rome, Valerian rose to power simply and ruled simply. Went to war a few times, killed a bunch of Christians, got beat up by Goths, basic Roman stuff. So when Valerian was captured by Cameo of Shampoo I, it boggles the mind why they went as far as they did in making sure that this dude wasn't just defeated, they made sure his entire genetic code wouldn't survive the humiliation he received. First on the menu was for the Shampoo to use him as a footstool while mounting their horses. He was then given the Crassus Special, a big old bowl of molten gold right down the gullet, which may or may not have happened while he was simultaneously being alive. His skin was then allegedly stuffed with straw and dyed, hung in the Persian temple for all to see. Seriously, the dude just didn't like Christians. Chill. Number 5. Gaius Valerius Catullus rap battle. Who doesn't love a good beef? Now, Catullus was a major poet, his works moving away from the retelling of classic tales and focusing more on the telling of day-to-day life. The personal nature of his works have lived in the minds of thousands, depicting humor, romance, and the beauty of day-to-day life. However, Catullus was no stranger to critics, 2 of his biggest being another poet, Furius, and Senator Aurelius. Now, constructive critique can be wonderful for artists. After all, it's the only way that you can improve. However, Catullus seemed to take a different view, writing a poem in dedication to his critics. Commonly referred to as Catullus 16, this poem was so filthy that it wasn't fully translated until the 20th century, and even then, several lines were heavily censored in most publications. Want to hear it? Well, it reads... Number 4. Roman birth control. Romans were... well, they got around a lot. Now, unless you want to deal with the immediate consequences of a whole lot of lovin', you've gotta figure out a way to stay safe. Picking up condoms from a shopper's wasn't really a thing, and Plan B hadn't been invented yet, so what was the plan? Well, it turned out that the Romans had discovered an herb called silphium, which supposedly had contraceptive properties. Whether or not that's actually true remains to be seen, specifically due to the fact that you can't find it anymore. That's right, the Romans were so raunchy and silphium was so popular that they caused the complete extinction of the plant, the last stalk of it reportedly being given to Emperor Nero. Now in 2020 there has been a theory presented that there is a similar herb, or a relative, found in Turkey, and it could be the surviving relative of the plant, but to this day not a sprig of silphium has been found. Apparently it looks like a heart though. Aww, ecological devastation. Number 3. Roman baths. The terms made its way around. Roman baths are synonymous with the country and culture as a symbol of civilization. But you've listened to enough of this list so far, so you can probably figure out where this is going. See, while Romans were known for their hygiene, urine laundry aside, they were usually pretty nasty when it came to bath time. Soap wasn't really a thing, so the baths were basically just huge vats of oil that they just slather up all in there. Now these oils were perfumed, but they were also reused frequently and were washed off using a strigil, a sort of scraping tool, so just spoon the dirt off. Ugh. Number 2. Cato the Younger. Alright. Here's a fun one. Marcus Porcius Cato, also known as Cato the Younger, was a Roman senator in the later years of Rome. A hugely influential man, his life was fraught with turmoil and strife. He was also a strong opposer of Julius Caesar's Hellenistic principles. Cato had no trouble joining the opposition on the brewing civil war. Now, during that civil war, Cato took command of a campaign in Utica, a tough campaign that he generally just planned to abandon alongside the Roman Empire. However, once they'd been defeated, Caesar moved to pardon Cato's family and allies. Convinced his end was drawing near, Cato took his life against his friends' and family's advice, stabbing himself in the abdomen. Now, some accounts claim that he actually drew out his own entrails from his body when the physicians attempted to heal him, ensuring that he wouldn't see Caesar's Rome. Maybe he knew that Caesar was planning to pardon him as well, which Cato would have considered the crueler punishment. Number 1. Caligula's horse. We'd be remiss not to talk about the antics of Emperor Caligula. Famed for his strange ways, one of the greatest legends of an already infamous emperor was his attempt to have his favored horse, Incitatus, enlisted as a consul. According to Suetonius's Lives of the 12 Caesars, this horse was dressed in lush finery, inviting dignitaries to dinners, and according to Cassius Dio, the horse was fed oats mixed with gold flakes and also possibly a priest. Now, a lot of this is left up to debate, and a number of historians will argue that this was nothing more than a prank at the expense of the Senate. While never officially made a consul, this horse has lived on in infamy, inspiring a number of fictional depictions in modern media, including the metal band Caligula's Horse. Regardless of the official status of the horse, the truth seems to be that this was nothing more than an attempt to mock his senators, but what a method of mockery.
Number 10. Sacred books. The Romans paved the way for many following civilizations, okay? They invented surgical tools, they invented medicine on the battlefield, and before this era, literature took the form of a tablet or a scroll. The Romans, they created the Codex. Pages stacked on top of one another, just bound pages. The reason you have homework right now to be doing instead of watching this. It's all thanks to the ancient Romans. The early Codex was bound wax, and then it moved to animal skin. This was a big step because early Christians used this new invention to produce copies of the Bible. Important pieces of history, so rightfully so, they had to be locked away from the public. Now back when King Tarquin ruled Rome, a local woman offered the Etruscan king 9 books. Now these books were ignored at first, but upon its second glance, the beat up manuscripts foretold the rise and fall of Rome. So for most of its time, these spoiler-filled manuscripts were held in the Temple of Jupiter. So if anybody wants to do National Treasure 3, I have some ideas, just saying. We could do like 9 installments. Number 9, corrupt fire department. Oh, here we go. When we think back to ancient times, it's not long before we come across an ancient blaze or some ancient wild tragedy where you're like, oh my god, how did that even happen? Something that reminds you that it wasn't always a party, okay? It was rarely a party, in fact. When we think of Julius Caesar when regarding the leadership of Rome, we often forget Marcus Crassus. He was powerful and full of bright ideas on the sidelines. Marcus ran the fire brigade. A lot of open fires, a lot of accidents happening at this time, so of course we need responders. But back then, these officials arrived on site to this blazing emergency, but before helping out, Crassus would demand the owner sells their property to him first. Yeah, watch it burn or sell it for a not so handsome price. The choice is yours. And also you have 38 seconds to decide. TikTok. Number 8, ancient drag. I'll respect a girl's night out, okay? Always. I get it. My guy friends have ruined most nights out that I've had in the city, because guys are dumbasses. That's a fact. Ancient Romans were ahead of the game with this one as well. That's why they made the festival of the good goddess women only. Yeah, statues of men weren't even allowed to partake. Statues depicting men at this festival had to be draped. Yeah, none of us were seeing anything. But then in comes Mr. Jealous, Mr. Ancient FOMO himself. Enter Publius Clodius Pulcher, okay? This man disguised himself as a flute lady, but when he didn't play the flute, and also wasn't a lady, and also nobody knew him, it was a little obvious that an intruder was present. A trial soon followed and the festival was then suspended. See, guys ruin the party, even in ancient Roman days. This dude's like, nah, I'm gonna go ruin it. Number 7, sewer goddess. I love reading about ancient gods. It's my favorite topic. The Roman god of manure and fertilizer, for example. Where was that one in Hades? That would have been helpful. I would have beat that game in 8 minutes flat with him. The god of toilets. There's one we can't forget about either. Crepitus, okay? Every day we have to thank the god of toilets, right? If you haven't today, go ahead and thank them. The Romans regarded Glossina as the goddess of the main drain. The literal main drain to the city of Rome, all this water. This goddess was Glauca Maximum, aka Big Drain. Eventually this god was affiliated with Venus, the goddess of beauty and love. Yeah, love me some big ass drains. Nice. That's a lie actually. As a kid, I was so afraid of the bathtub drain. I would pull it and then just immediately high jump out of the tub. I don't want to get sucked down like Ant-Man. Know what I mean? Number 6, death before combat. With most of these Roman gladiators, they're trained, they understand a specific style of combat, and they're paired with an opponent that's somewhat equal. And then hundreds of people go, yeah, and they bet on you, and then see blood and stuff. It's horrible. But not all these gladiators are UFC fighters, okay? Not all of them are Kurt Russell and handsome. No, a great amount of these gladiators were criminals who were forced to fight each other in the name of entertainment, or they were slaves. Yeah, these prisoners of war were not really on board with fighting a lion with a dagger, believe it or not. They understood this was a one-way trip most likely, so many of them took their own lives before the combat even begun. This one story is quite haunting, but it makes total sense. Sadly, 29 prisoners, they were all set to fight these crazy animal battles in front of thousands, but they all strangled each other. They all took each other's lives with their bare hands because that was easier to them than walking into this nightmare publicly. That's horrible. The reason this was the easier choice to make, sadly, was because saying no to the combat or to the games would just lead to an even more painful public execution. So it's a lose-lose, sadly. They sucked. Number 5, loincloths. Going back to ancient Roman and Egyptian times, here we go, 2 for 1. The loincloth was of course used by all. Either that or you would just be naked. I found this neat step-by-step on how to make your own loincloth, and I tried it, and it's way more complicated than I could have ever imagined, okay? We don't have a lot of archaeological evidence because these linens barely made it through a decade, obviously. There's not a lot of bones in them that would hang out over these thousands of years. But ancient Romans would often use leather to make underwear. Can you imagine that? Hot goat skin wrapped around your waist in the sun? Oh, I need baby powder just thinking about it right now. We still use leather today when it comes to undergarments and, you know, zippers and stuff, but that's for another video. We'll get to that another time. Number 4, cesspools. Hey, here's a note. If you're gonna make a massive castle, you need to know where not to build certain rooms, in case you're building a castle. Anyone watching? Like say over a cesspool, as an example. Yeah, don't build anything heavy over here, or else let's talk about it. Cesspools were often placed under floors, which makes sense because, you know, gravity and life and stuff. But you need to make sure those floors are supportive enough, period. That's it. Or else, this will happen. Back in 1183, the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire had a dinner in the Palace of Erfurt. But in the main floor of the main hall broke open, resulting in a bunch of dinner guests falling through said floor, with even a few drowning again in said cesspool. Yeah, it's a horrible way to go. And then again, in 1326 in England, Richard the Raker had just sat down. The guy hasn't even started his meal yet, and then again the floor beneath him broke and he fell through and drowned in a cesspool. That's like the worst way to drown too. I'd say chamber pots were safer, but when it comes to waste, out of sight, out of mind. Sadly, just get that shit away from me. Just downhill, get it out, or else we'll drown in it, probably. Number 3, Roman shampoo. Okay, when my hair grew out over the pandemic, I had a panic attack. I don't know what the f to do. I had a huge wake-up call. I've never had long hair before. I didn't know what to use in this mop. I still don't. Clearly, evidently, all I had growing up was the classic 4-in-1 shampoo for guys. That wasn't working out at all. That sucked. I needed some curl cream, okay? Separate jars of items, not just a 5-in-1 with mouthwash on your head. Those aren't good. Those don't do anyone any good. But the ancient Romans, they didn't have Head and Shoulders back then. What did they do? Well, sometimes nothing. They would dip their hair in cold water, and at public bathhouses also, very public, then they would rub and scrape away oils. Lime water was also used to wash your hair, but that was just as useful as lime wire. Sometimes Europeans wouldn't even use water at all to clean their head. They would rub their head with bran, like just a loose bran, before bed, and then they'd brush it out with a comb in the morning. Yeah, bran. I used dog shampoo once by accident. I thought that was bad. Bran? It'd be so itchy, I wouldn't sleep a wink. Number 2, ancient socks. Somebody got me socks over the holidays as a gift, and let me tell you, last year, I became a man. I was like, thank you, I actually love this. This is now the best gift of my life. Socks and lip balm, that's it. I don't want a PlayStation, get lost. Socks in ancient Greece, first of all, they weren't, you know, the ankle socks. There weren't Vans skateboarding socks. There weren't the weird grippy ones that kids have. Where were those growing up, first of all? Not even close. Socks came around in the 8th century BC, and it was made fresh from animal hairs. This led to Romans tying animal skins around their feet, and then, you know, tying it more and more and more and higher and higher. Anything to keep it there. Now cut to the 2nd century AD in ancient Rome, the sock game finally got real. Romans began using fabrics instead of animal skins. It was now softer, it was lighter, and then later in the 5th century, socks were worn only by the most holy, which is kind of ironic because socks have holes in them. You get the joke, there it is. Socks were associated with the church. They were considered a symbol of purity. Socks would go all the way up your leg back then. Like I said, a little different than the New Balance ankle socks we got today. A little less holy. Finally, number 1, public bathhouse. This last one, okay, we haven't moved on from this at all. That's why I wanted to finish this list. Nice little fresh, fun reminder from Taylor McWaters. Here we go. We still bathe together, a lot. We go to water parks and we swim around in pools filled with pee. Ancient Roman bathhouses were the older, slightly yuckier versions of water parks. They would literally spread intestinal parasites. They were actually way worse. In these massive rooms with giant pools just lie disease, nude, there were and everyone was sweaty and it was all tight and there was no filtration system. It was like an indoor hot tub without the pumps or the salts. It was gross. The Romans were literally figuring out sewage systems at the same time, which I of course mentioned earlier, but they were also the first to create heated public baths. Yeah, my above ground pool wasn't heated, but the ancient Romans, they had heated pools. Great, I just sent an email to my dad this afternoon, now I'm pissed. The archaeology and anthropology department at Cambridge discovered that Romans brought lots of parasites to Europe. Yeah, the fossilized feces showed that these heated, relaxing, rejuvenating bathhouses nearby were all but. Yeah, they were horrible. They were just spreading hot disease, coming in hot. I don't mean to undermine the ancient Romans. To be fair, they also brought with them lice and fleas. Ayo, this one for the road.
Number 10, not all looks. History is written by the victors. In this case, the Romans, who liked to paint Cleopatra here as a sinful seductress in the night. And in a lot of our media, she is portrayed just that way. But that may have not been totally the case. At least, she wasn't all looks. According to historians, she was a scholar, and she enjoyed the company of other scholars. She probably knew a dozen different languages, and she was well versed in mathematics, philosophy, oratory, and astronomy. If that weren't enough, apparently it's possible she wasn't actually as attractive as we think. A lot of coins and some art display her with somewhat masculine features. I mean, maybe that was considered attractive. But some people believe these coins just show these features to make her look more powerful, as most rulers back in the day were men. She was a female pharaoh of Egypt. there's only a slim chance she was not an incredibly intelligent person. We just don't know for sure.
Number 9, the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt, and what may come as a surprise to some, she wasn't actually Egyptian. Okay, yes, she was born in Egypt, but she was of Macedonian descent. However, what's more mysterious than that is her passing. After a bunch of political misfortune that I'm sure Adam will get into at a later point, the last pharaoh that we knew, she was about to lose her kingdom, so in true dramatic form, she allowed 2 asps to bite her, releasing her from this mortal realm. This may or may not be true, something that has been spun up since her absence. Sure, there's truth in everything, but we'll never really know. One thing's for sure, she was a cunning leader and did whatever it took to be a leader.
Number 8, sibling rivalry. Look, back in the day, power was something that drove people to do some not so savory things. Like turning on your brother husband and starting a civil war for sole possession of the throne, teaming up with the ruler of a much stronger empire, and taking out anyone who was your potential rival. And I don't mean taking them out on a date. Cleopatra may or may not have had a hand in the untimely demise of her first and second brother husbands, Ptolemy the 13th and 14th. The first for not letting her have full power, and the second one so that she could make her son co-ruler. But it doesn't stop there. She was almost definitely responsible for the execution of her sister Arsinoe. Brother husbands and non-accidental fatal incidents. I'm not really a fan of this.
Number 7, bedtime with Caesar. When I said she was a cunning warrior and would do whatever it takes to be a great leader, I meant it. Cleopatra knew how to control the politics around her and the men who held power. She gave the thing that all men can't resist. Yes, that's right. Throwing rocks in a river. It's our favorite pastime. We just love doing it. I don't know. I'm just kidding. It was actually all the other stuff like wealth, power, and the devil's bedroom dance. You know what I'm talking about. Cleopatra had the men wrapped around her finger. All was going great if it weren't for a little political strife in Rome. She ended up with Mark Antony, then Octavian, aka Augustus. He was on the rise to power when the curtains closed, a republic had fallen, and an empire was here to stay for a long time. Long enough for a whiny teenager from Tashi Station to destroy a space station. Or something like that.
Number 6, trendsetter. Maybe you knew, maybe you didn't, but in 44 BC, Cleopatra went back to Rome with Julius Caesar as his not-so-subtle side chick, bringing their not-so-subtly named son, Caesarion, with them. And while he was totally with Calpurnia at the time, he even built a statue for Cleopatra in the Temple of Venus. This was pretty scandalous and had a lot of people doing the side-eye emoji, but it also had a lot of people being like, damn, look at this Egyptian lady, look at her style, her hair, her clothes. Our girl Cleopatra had an impact on the fashion in Rome, even if she was only there for 2 years until her mans got punctured like a fresh new bubble tea, except he was punctured 22 more times.
Number 5, Isis Reborn. The Greeks called her Acid. She is an acid. I don't know. God of the moon, the goddess of life and magic, a protector to women and children. Yes, the goddess of the moon was quite important to Egyptian mythology. What if you could convince the people that you were a god? What if you were actually the goddess of magic and healing and a protector of the women and children? Anyone who works for PR can tell you how important self-image is, especially when you're the gal in charge. Statues of the goddess Asit were made in Cleopatra's likeness, and her public image became that of an all-important goddess. I wish I was the goddess of healing and magic, but I'll settle for King of the Hive.
Number 4, drinking buddies. So, after her last Roman boyfriend got, Cleopatra found a new lover in the Roman general Mark Antony. While it was a political move to have protection, it was also because they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. They even had a drinking club, which honestly would be kind of cute if it wasn't for the scandals and war, and honestly pretty much everything else. The inimitable livers is what they called themselves, and they spent the winter of 40 and 41 BC living it up, drinking and feasting almost every night. They had games and contests, and apparently these two lovebirds would dress up in disguises and go out into Alexandria and play pranks on people. Now that is actually pretty cute, I won't lie. Pretty cute.
Number 3, Theatrics. When I was a young lad in every classroom I was ever in, the teacher, no matter how young or old, had a variation of this to say to me. Nice teachers would say this: Andrew, you have a lot of energy. Let's try and focus. The mean teachers would say, shut up and read your book. What am I getting at here? Well, in my mind, just because it was math class, that didn't mean it wasn't a stand-up comedy stage. Just how it goes. Cleopatra also felt this in her heart. No, not comedy, theater, or drama, just being extra, very extra. The whole revealing yourself by unraveling a rug is the definition of theater. There's also the whole Elizabeth Taylor connection. If you've ever seen the movie Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor, then you know what I'm talking about. This also could be directly because of that, and for those who think Cleopatra, they probably think of Elizabeth Taylor, which is very...
Number 2, forever young. You know, for all the things she did and who she was in history, Cleopatra did not live an incredibly long life. She actually only lived to be 39, dying in 30 BC. She brought the end of an era, one that had been around since 3100 BC. The line of pharaohs was Egypt's way of life for over 3,000 years, and Cleopatra left us only 2,051 years ago. This isn't so much a mysterious point about Cleopatra, it's more like a mysterious point about Egypt and pharaohs in general. What is cool is that for the last 300 years before Cleopatra VII, her family had spoke only Greek, and the very last one in their line, the very last pharaoh of Egypt, who closed out a 3,000-year-long tradition, was the first and last Ptolemaic ruler who decided to actually learn how to speak Egyptian and who embraced the Egyptian culture that she was the ruler of.
Number 1, rumors and hearsay. Look, we've talked about a lot of stuff here on this list, but the trouble is we can't be too sure of what is true and what's Hollywood. The classical historical equation of a long time ago plus not enough primary sources of information multiplied by 2 cute internet hosts, well, we just don't know. We'd love to bring you the cold hard history facts with just a sprinkle of funny in there, but this list was difficult. So if you guys know anything about Cleopatra and her mysteries, please share. I'd love to hear it. Let us know in the comments below. But the truth is, there's just a lot of mystery surrounding the gal. That's just how it goes.